All right.
Okay.
So let's welcome John Barron to episode 2 of
Yay.
Hey.
Yes. Thank you for episode 1, John, and I will let Victoria take over here.
Well, thank you all for coming back. Before we start, I don't know if anybody has any questions or anything from the last time, or should we just kind of roll ahead here?
Anybody has questions, just chime in. But it was pretty concise, John. It made a lot of sense.
Right. I say we just roll with it, John, and
Okay.
some of it might stir the question in everybody's mind, and they can just pop on and ask you.
Okay, well, I did get a little grief about not doing things, about going outside the lines on maybe using the power hammer to taper the ribbon scroll and using a grinder to cut the tenon. But just keep in mind, this was geared toward level 2 smiths or students, and they should have been through some of these processes before in the traditional way they're taught. Part of the reason I kind of went out of bounds a little bit was for the time constraint with Greg being here. Greg showed up at 8 o'clock or 9 o'clock in the morning, and we did the whole thing in one day, and he left at 6 o'clock at night, and we never stopped for lunch. And the other thing is, there's more than one way to skin a cat. And, once you learn one way, there's other ways you can get to the same point. And especially if you're doing it as a commission piece or you're getting paid for it, you want to be as quick and efficient as you can in order to get through the project. So that's my story, and I'm sticking to it. And there's going to be more of that. You're going to see a little more of that later on tonight.
Well, and John, I'm just going to add to that. I'm glad you brought that up. Think about it like this. The level 2 grill is a test. And the idea of the test is to demonstrate that you have these hand forging techniques. We already know John passed the test. So if he wants to use a power hammer to do a ribbon scroll, he can. And so could you. But for your test, that's a little different thing.
Right. And not everybody has a power hammer, and not everybody has this other equipment. And, you can cut that tenon with a hacksaw and get to the same place, not quite as quickly, but still get there.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. All right.
So let's move on. Okay, we did the ribbon scroll last week, and now we're going to go through the 3 other types of scrolls, and then toward the end we're going to assemble the whole thing. So the first one here is the snub in scroll, and there's 2 of those. Each one is on the end of the same bar as the bevel scroll. So we can get started with the snub in. And here's a storyboard for it. And this is 3/8 by 3/4 flat bar. And you'll notice I want you to pay attention to, like, the 3rd step here has the square in forged on the end of a flat bar. this is going to be, from there on, it's going to be all the same for the snub in and the halfpenny scroll. It's just with the snub in scroll, you're maintaining the width of the bar. Everything is staying 3/4 of an inch wide. And on the snub or the halfpenny scroll, the square is going to be narrower than the 3/4 inch bar. So it's just a couple of different steps in the beginning, and then it's actually repeating. And reading the technical stuff about the level 2 grill, these two scrolls are considered the same scroll. And so in my level 2 grill, I used 4 different scrolls instead of 2 from the same family. But that's neither here nor there. So let's move ahead. The first step is to set the shoulder to offset, isolate the mass for the snub end, the round end. And that's done over the edge of the anvil with half face blows, and then it goes from there. The next step is to forge it into the square. And here's that happening there. And we are going to see a video of this. So just set off the right amount. The thing to keep in mind with doing multiples of these is you're eyeballing what you're hanging over the side of the anvil, and where you're doing it, how sharp that is on your anvil is going to make a difference. You know, if you hang over 3/4 of an inch or you hang over 7/8 of an inch, it's going to make a difference in the size of the ball that you end up with. So here's just setting down that, isolating that material. And it's going to want to spread out, so you want to keep it to the 3/4 inch thickness. And so that's just putting the chamfer on the edges again, because you're not going to be able to get a chance to do it later. And here's upsetting that material on the end, bending it up a little bit, and then driving it back down into a square shape. Because if you want to go to round, you got to go from square to octagon to round. And it's important to keep perpendicular to the anvil and to look at it from both sides, because it's real easy to get one side looking really good and the other side is like way bigger or way smaller than the good side. So you want to pay attention to both sides of that. And if you're not 90 degrees, you're going to get more material on one side than the other, and it's going to make your snub look funky in the end. So then once you get the square, it's break down the 2 corners to make it more the lemon shape or the football shape, and then roll it up and then drive that point down in and make a nice, perfectly round circle on the end. And so that's going to octagon. That's getting it round and checked from both sides. Now it's rolling it into the round.
So is there a targeted size diameter for that snub?
I don't think there's a correct diameter. It depends on how much material you lay off in the beginning. Because the more you lay off, you're going to end up with a bigger snub, and the less you lay off, it's going to be smaller. So it's just, you know, what looks right. And I generally on a 3/4 inch bar, I'll put 3/4 of an inch over the edge of the anvil. And then once you get the ball on the end or the snub on the end, then it's time to start scrolling it. Okay. And that's a little starter scroll for this, because the balls, you can't, it's a little tougher to do it over the edge of the anvil because the ball is already against the anvil. And this is the point where everybody has trouble, including me. You end up with that big kink in the end of it. And so you have to be careful with that. And here's getting to a jig. But it's important to get a nice line on the outside part of the scroll from the transition between the snub and then into the scroll. And a lot of times there's a kink right there. It's like a big bump that you end up struggling with. And, you know, there's nothing wrong with taking a file and filing that out if you can't work it out. So now we'll go to the halfpenny scroll, which you can see on the fourth step on this one. It looks exactly like where we were on the third step with the snub end scroll, and all the other ones from this angle look the same, but it's in the cross section has been changed 90 degrees. And so the first step is to, again, set a shoulder down. But in this case, you don't want to correct for width because you're going to end up with a basically octagon shaped piece at this point. And it's half face blows over the edge of the anvil, setting off again, this is probably started with about 7/8 over the edge of the anvil to get that started. And so you just want to bring it down close to, because it's 3/8 to start with, you want to bring it down at that point close to 3/8. And then you end up with the bulging on the sides. And you don't correct for that yet. And so the next step would be to put a twist in it. And you can see where the corners leave a line there. Had you corrected for the width, it would be harder to, this gives you plenty of material to forge out into the taper and make all those lines disappear. And so there's the twisted piece. And then it's forge out that twist and make your taper. And now it kind of looks just like a snub end scroll, except the snub end was 3/4 of an inch wide, and this is about 5/16 of an inch wide, the material for the scroll, for the half penny. And that's just developing the taper and getting rid of the twisting marks. And that's checking the length of the taper. You saw the chalk mark at the heel of the anvil. And so with this forging to dimension, you need to forge them the same length. And I had that written down on the board, so to draw it to X amount of inches long. And so you work on that taper until you get there. And then turn that blob on the end into a square. Because there's less of a corner. The part that was hanging over the anvil has less material there. So you kind of have to drag the other two corners around to get it to be square. And you can see with that, the swing of that hammer, it's trying to pull that tip material into that smaller section. And if you don't get to a square, it's just going to make the next step even harder. It's real easy to think, oh, I'll fix this up later. This is pretty close. It'll be fine. Well, it only gets worse. So again, this looks like the same pictures we saw before, but it's, that ball is only 1/4 of an inch thick at this point, instead of the full width of the flat bar. So it's the same thing, make the lemon, round it up and round it over. And again, it's always a huge problem right in that transition from where that crotch area is in there, to get a nice smooth line on the outside so that there's no flat spots or bumps on that outside as you're starting into the scroll. right in there is where I have a lot of problems with it. Not only everyone else, but I do.
Everybody has. Yours look really good, John.
Well, there's something if you're at this point, like in between the middle picture and the one on the right, and if there's that bump out there, one thing I'll do is to heat it up, quench the ball section of it. That would be in the picture on the right. Quench that where your pointer is, and then you can hammer that bump down into it without deforming the nice ball shape you have on there. And so that's one way to get rid of that that hump that's right there. And the other way is to, at this point, if that bump is in there and not looking good, take a file and round that off. And there's nothing wrong with using a file to clean that up. There's not too many that I've made that haven't had the touch of the file on them.
John, it also looks like if you look at this curve here, see it's so round. It looks like you might have taken that over a sharper edge.
Well, that's
that
because
could-
it's been rolled over closer to the 90-degree. As you
Okay.
push that point up toward 90 degrees, it tightens up that that crotch in there.
Okay.
And it does the same thing from there to the next one. Now it makes it really tight in there. And that's part of the process of rounding that last tip that's out there, tightens that up. If that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. I've seen if you sharpen this early, you kind of get rid of that extra little material there, and that sometimes will prevent the hump.
Well,
Or at least I assume that's what you did, but I clearly was wrong.
well, I didn't do that, but that may be a way to deal with that, is to draw that down a little tighter and crisper right there. But it's just, it seems to me that the outside of the scroll doesn't want to act like you want the inside to, and because it's how to describe it, it's 90 degrees to where that crotch section is. It's a short distance, but you're getting that, trying to round from further up on the outside of the scroll. So that's a longer distance, and it wants to bend at the shortest distance. And so I think that's
So
where
like-
that problem comes in.
So like right here.
You're actually wanting to stretch it farther on the outside there, and it wants to just collapse at the skinny point.
Oh, okay, that makes sense. Yeah, and that would you end up with, I mean, you don't
So
really
you
have a
get
hump there, but yeah,
Right in there.
well, barely.
Side needs to stretch farther, and in that narrow section, it just goes on its own because it's hot and it's the shortest section. So you end up with that lump out there that you were hoping to drag into the curve, and it didn't want to go because it bent where at the easiest point.
Okay, thanks.
So there's that, and you want to kind of round, chamfer your edges there. Those edges would have been chamfered earlier than this, but once you get your nice round shape there, you want to go back and chamfer those edges, and it's to get into that crotch is pretty difficult with a hammer, because especially with that tapered bar. So, I will usually dress those up with a file to take off any sharp edges or anything. And you can change the shape of that disc that's out there using a round faced hammer. If your half penny is not quite round, you can use the round faced hammer to push material out to make it to fill those flat spots. So there's, starting the scroll, and then you see it from the end, how it tapers in that direction. And then there's the more completed scroll. And so we're starting it over that same little starter. And and with scrolls, it's always the first like inch or inch and a half that makes it. The rest is easy after that, but it's just like getting this part to look right is the hard part. And then there's a jig for the rest of it. And you always want to be pulling on the bar, not just wrapping it around, because otherwise it's going to want to bend in the wrong place. And you have to keep an eye on what's happening, because where it's the hottest, it's going to bend the fastest, and it's not always where you want to bend. And then if you push it too far, the scroll will actually pull away from the jig because it's bending there instead of where you want it. So it's just something you have to watch for. So there's the half penny scroll. And then here's where I mentioned about, getting your edges nice and consistent with the bevel you have on the bars. All the bars I used in these, the flat bars, I heat them up and run it through what I call the edge wrecker on my power hammer. I have dies for different size material that holds the flat bar at a 45-degree angle, and then the hammer flattens that corner that's up, and then do that on all four sides so that you get a nice chamfer on the edges. It also scales up the piece so it looks more forged rather than just material right off the rack. And when it gets to scrolling, it makes the collars go on a lot easier because the corners are eased over. Because the inside corner of your collar is not going to be a sharp 90 degrees. No matter what you do, it's going to have a radius in there, and putting the bevel on all the bars makes the collars fit snug.
That's an awesome idea. I didn't think of making a fixture.
Yeah,
It's
it's
hammer to do that.
I have these like saddles that fit over the power hammer die,
Right.
with a flat plate on the top. And for this application, there's an angle iron in the middle of it, laid so that the two legs of the angle iron are down toward the bottom die.
Sure.
And so that gives me the 45 degrees. And the angle iron is sized so that it doesn't get hit by the top die, but that the material size will. And then there's another angle iron at the bottom so that the edge of that flat bar lays against that, so it doesn't just push push the angle iron down the
Right,
side.
pop out, right?
Yeah, it doesn't let it pop out. And so, you just put it in there and bang, 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 bang down
Right.
one side, and then you can tip it to the other side, get the other corner, and then jump to the other side of that middle angle iron and get the other two corners.
Sure.
And it puts a nice edge on everything. It does tend to twist the bar, especially if you're doing long pieces. They get a twist in it and it deforms, and it takes a little bit of straightening and taking a twist out and all that, but it does. Now you have a forged bar rather than
Right.
something that came off the shelf somewhere.
Right. No, it looks awesome. That's a great idea.
So now we go to the bevel scroll. That I don't know who invented this, but they had quite an imagination.
Cruel. It was a cruel person that invented it.
Yeah.
Or a show off. I'm not sure which.
You got a twisted sense of humor.
Yeah. So with the this bevel scroll, you're making a three-sided taper. You can see in the picture there that it's tapered in one direction, but it's also, if you turn it up on edge, it's kind of down to a knife edge down toward the end. And then you take that and just round it over the edge of the anvil and use the horn as it gets further around. And again, it's that wiping blow. You're not hitting the iron into the anvil. You're tapping it down. The hammer is hitting air, not the anvil. And then you just bring this little scroll shape around. And then that's just tightening up the inside and dressing it up a little bit. I like to do that over where I can look down on what's going on. If you do that on the face of the anvil, you don't really know what your hammer did. So you have to turn it up and look at it. And by doing this on the side of the anvil, you can see exactly what is happening when you're hitting it. And then you'll know where to hit it the next time and how to rotate that around and get that shape you're looking for. So that's just drawing the initial taper, keeping the bottom side straight. And here we're starting to feed it over the edge. The further out you get, the more you can push it forward and the harder you need to hit it. And it's a bit of work getting the bar to scroll in that direction. But once you get it around, then it becomes much easier. And here it's like just tuning it up, and I can rotate my left hand around and do whatever it needs to do to get it looking the way I want it. So then the next step is to put that bevel in, and you're trying to create that ridge down the center of it. And so using a rounding hammer, you're working one side of that ridge and then the other side. And I always want to start with the inside edge, because as you hammer on the inside edge, that scroll shape is going to open up and wanting to straighten itself out. And then when you work the outside edge, it tightens back up again. So I'll use a smaller rounding hammer on the inside that has a smaller diameter head, and then use a larger one on the outside. And you can use the flat face of the hammer on the outside, but if you stay with the rounding hammer, it takes a little bit more control, but you get more of a dish shape on that outside edge, and that will help that middle ridge pop more. If you do it with just a flat faced hammer, it's a straight line down from the ridge to the edge of the outside edge of the scroll. But with the rounding hammer, it makes that ridge a little more evident there. But it's easy to misshape the outside edge to keep that nice smooth line on the outside. And if it gets bumpy out there, get your file out and make it look nice. And so while you're doing that, you're trying to develop that line, and that's what you're looking at is getting that line nice and crisp and down the middle. And there's working on the outside. And generally for one like this, it's two passes for me. It's do the inside, then do the outside, and then go back and do the inside again and sharpen it up, and the outside again. So here we're doing another pass on the inside, I guess.
So why do we do these?
Why do we do these scrolls?
That's a good question.
I don't know. And this
I've
part
always
this
struggled
part
with
is not bad. I mean, these are not, this part of it's not difficult. The difficult part is getting it to transition to the 90 degrees. And there's you can, it's pretty clear to see the that center ridge going down there.
Right. I mean, it's beautiful, John.
And then, then you want to fade them off into the bar equally on both sides. And if you could stop there, I'd make these all the time. But you got to get it to change 90 degrees. And some people will take it and just put it in the vise and twist it 90 degrees. But there's the finished. Yeah, there's kind of a step on doing it. You want to, and I have done a couple where you just, the next step we're going to see is putting that transition in there where they just come out like, wow, how did that happen? And other ones end up struggling like crazy to get it to look right. And here we go. It's just a matter of feeding the tip of the scroll out there, and again, you're going to air. You're not hitting against the anvil. And I've also done that. A lot of times I use a wooden mallet for it. The wooden mallet doesn't get it to move fast enough, but it doesn't damage your that center ridge that you put in there, because you know you're hitting that with a hammer, and you know you're flattening something you worked really hard to make into a point. So it's just kind of walk that around and hammer it down, similar to the scroll over the edge of the anvil, but you're going in a circle. And here we go, little starts down, and you rotate that bar around. And what does make that, if you look at the back side of that scroll and how it, because it kind of went from almost there to now I'm in the scrolling jig. When you get it to a certain point, you can just kind of twist it into that 90 degrees, but it's that transition on the outside of the bottom that really kind of defines the elegance of that scroll.
You're talking about this inside?
No, if we could go back a little bit where this was upside down, where it came out of the jig.
All right, let me see if I can do that.
Okay, right at this point, that it's that back outside line kind of looking at that makes if you get that looking good, the front will look good.
Oh,
It's that transition right where your pointer is there, right where it's kind of going off the screen. It's like, that's where it can get out of control. And if you can get that graceful across there, then the front will look good.
okay. I'm gonna play this a little more, I think. Yeah, I gotta get rid of the pointer.
And even at this point, you can still lay it down on the anvil and, you know, work that section if it needs it. But that's where they either look really good or they look funky because that transition is too fast.
So would you have the face on the anvil and work it from the back? Because then you can see the back?
No, I'd probably have it face up.
Okay,
But just looking at that section and paying attention to that section. And you do need to get the scroll, you know, kind of on the same plane. And I don't know if there's a rule, or, you know, the perfect scroll would be the tip of that scroll is on the same plane as that back edge of the scroll all the way through, or does that tip want to come forward toward the front part of it. I don't know what the perfect,
Oh, you're like this top part,
yeah.
does that
Does-
all?
Does the top line want to be in one plane, or does the bottom line want to be in one plane? Or is it balanced in the middle? I tend to kind of put it in the middle, and I don't know if
Okay.
there's a correct way or incorrect way.
I don't know one way or the other either, but I always look for that negative space. Like that negative space
Right,
should be clean. So whatever it takes to get that
right.
look the way you want it to, do that way.
But with this transition going from the wide bevel scroll into the narrow back to the 3/8, that needs to be a nice line also. And if you get too much material spread out, it's a balance. It's more of a balance with this scroll than other scrolls, that the most scrolls, the inside negative space is what makes it a good looking scroll. But you can, with this scroll, that outside line has to be good looking also. You can't just rely on the negative space on the inside,
Yeah, that makes sense.
because the outside could be in this particular view here, it looks like it's really wide, and then that part where it goes into the narrow section, that needs to be as a nice smooth transition as well.
You're talking about this outside that we can't really see here.
Well, right there, where it's at the jig, that outside part, come down to the outside of the bevel scroll right through there. That needs to be a nice line also. And it can be kind of, oh, the inside looks good, but the outside doesn't.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And you can, knock the inside down more or the outside down more to get that line. But it's more of a,
I'm gonna go back to the storyboard where there, I passed it. Hang on. This. So we're talking about this line
Right.
right here.
because like this view right here, that outside line needs to be nice and graceful, and the inside needs to be nice and graceful. And with this scroll being the width of that material out there, when it's changing into the 90-degree section in there, it needs to be a nice smooth transition. If it's too sudden, then that outside line doesn't look right. And if it's too slow, the inside doesn't look right. So in my experience with this scroll, you have to pay attention to both those lines way more than you do doing other scrolls. It's always, it's that inside negative space. But this one needs, that outside.
Well, and you've actually done a nice job with the third thing you can look at too, and that's this narrow end, because this part's wide, right, going away from us.
Right.
And then this narrow, you've got a beautiful transition in that too.
Yeah, and that's the whole pain in the ass part of doing this
Right.
is getting that shape, because it's, you're turning it 90 degrees while you're rolling it around a scroll form. And I've done some where, it's like 10 heats on this thing trying to get it to look right. And, it's not happening. And then another one that does it in 2 heats.
So, John, I quote you often because you told me one time that the ones that don't work out end up in the pile on the floor, and you call that your trail of tears.
Oh yeah, pile of tears.
Pile of tears. So, but yeah, you got all 3 lines, this inside edge, this taper on that inside edge, and then the outside line.
Yeah, and then, like I say, for me, this scroll is the one that you have to watch all those things, where a ribbon scroll, you know, what happens on the inside happens on the outside. If the inside looks good, the outside's going to look good. And pretty much the other scrolls, it's the same thing, as long as you don't have that bump on the outside of those snub in or bevel scrolls. But this one is the trickiest one to make both sides look good.
Okay, I'm gonna make everybody dizzy, so close your eyes. I'm gonna zip ahead to where we left off. Unless you want to see the video again. Okay.
Okay, so I think we're going to see some pictures of tuning up the scroll, what I call tuning up the scrolls, getting them to fit the drawing, and then assembling this thing and making the collars, and then getting this all put together. So here's after the bevel scroll, bringing it farther around to where it's fitting the drawing. And you can see how hot the iron is there, but I'm using the bending fork as something to rest it on, so I can get it right on the drawing, and I'm not burning I'm not laying it right on the wood and burning the wood, because once you burn off the wood, you burn your lines off. And so sometimes I'll put little bits of like 1/4-inch plate, lay it on there, then I can just plop the scroll down on it and see how it's looking, and then get back to the vise, and bend it while it's still got heat in it. So this is just checking the this part of the scroll. And here we're just tuning it up a little bit. And there we're got it just about there. And now working on the other end, doing the same thing. Since that fork is underneath there, that part is still hot. And so it's a matter of, shaping the scroll to fit the drawing. And yeah, it's not exact, but it's gonna work. And this says cold work, but I'm holding it with tongs, so there's heat and something on there. And then I have, parts I clamp into the vise that are like reverse forks, so that I have, I can isolate exactly where I want to bend anything. And then this, you'll notice this is real common with making S scrolls or C scrolls, where they're on different planes. So you need to check and get everything in alignment. And here we're doing the other end of that scroll. And there again, see, it needs to go a little bit more, so we go to the bending forks. And you have to be careful with using these bending forks on hot. You know, when part of it's hot, it's going to bend real easy. And then when it gets to that section of the iron that wasn't hot, it wants to kink right there. So it's real easy to put kinks into it. And so it's, with doing scrolls like this, it's a lot of just fiddling around. Oh, it needs a little bend here. Oh, there's a little flat spot here. Oh, needs to go a little farther. Or oops, I bent it too far and I gotta, open it up again. So once all the scrolls are all tuned up, the last thing that needs to be made is the collars. And there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 different, I think there's 5 different size collars on this. No, even 6 maybe. So this collar math says the width times 2 plus the length times 2 plus the bend times 4 plus the overlap times 2. We're going to get back into some math again, it looks like. But there's another collar math that's from Mark Asbury's book, is the perimeter of the bars to be collared plus 2.5 times the thickness of the collar material. But that will get you to a collar that just butts up against each other, not one that overlaps like we're using in this. So you have to allow for that taper on the end, and that taper on the end can be done. I do it with on a belt grinder. I have done it with just forging that taper. If you're going to forge that taper, it needs to be a really consistent taper. It's short, and if you taper it too long, then it laps over itself too long. And if you don't taper it enough, it's too short. And this is one of the parts of this that you're down to working with thousandths of an inch and getting collars that fit nice and tight and butt right up against each other or just lay perfectly together. So we'll go to this one. This is a collar that goes around 3/4 by 1. So that would be like 3/4 by 1/2 and 3/4 by 1/2 would make the 3/4 by 1. Because the way I mark these is 3/4 is one direction and the 1 inch is the other dimension. And what I've done, first you can see with in that previous picture, the edges on the collar, I ran through the dies like we talked about before to break the edges of down the length, and then use the punch to punch that line down the middle by hand. And you can see it's not a straight perfect line. It's kind of funny looking at, because I'll do this in like a 2 foot or 3 foot length, and you sight down the line and it looks like a drunken sailor put that line in there. But when you wrap it around in short distances, it looks fine. And so it's been my practice. I use a lot of the same materials over and over again. It's like I'm going to make a collar to go around 3/4 by 1. And I get a length dialed in that works great. I save one as a setup piece. And this one's stamped 3/4 by 1. So with this, I can go out to the saw, use this to set up a stop and cut all my collars. And I don't have to, because the math, figuring out the math gets you in the ballpark. And it's never quite reliable. And even with these setups that I use, I always do a practice one first, because, and here's, okay, there's 5, this was for the sign project. So there's 5 different collars and they have the different dimensions on them. And one that I made that do those dimensions. And so I keep these in a box, and if I've got to go around something that's 3/4 by 1, I pull out the 3/4 by 1. And I've already done the math and have to make it a little bit longer, a little bit shorter. And even if I'm doing 3/4 by 1, I will do a test piece to make sure it's going to work in the situation that I have. And sometimes it's like, oh, this is too long. And sometimes it's like, oh, this is too short. But I don't want to make 50 collars and then find out when I put the first one on, oh, this is too long. Because something that you have to keep in mind is that this fits around a 3/4 by 1 straight bar. The collar is going to be 3/8 by 1 and 3/8 by 1 butted up against each other. And they're only touching at one point. Are they truly 3/4 of an inch thick? And the wider that collar is, that 1 inch is growing because it's on a curve. So you have to take into account, the curve of your scrolls. If it's going around scrolls, if it's going around 2 bars laying tight against each other, it's a different story. But so if I'm doing more than 2 or 3, even using these things, I will check and make sure that, okay, this is going to work before I put in all the time of making the collar material and then finding out it's not going to work. So
yeah, I've been there.
yeah, and it's real frustrating.
Just not making the test piece. And
yeah, if you just do the math and you need 20 of these collars,
and you even cut like 22 out.
Yeah, you end up throwing away 20 of them because they're a 1/16 of an inch too short.
Right. So I think that's the word of the night tonight is test pieces. Maybe we can all go back to Sesame Street, and this is the word of the night. So
yeah, and I'll set up a little setup thing on my belt sander that I can put the collar onto this line and grind it to the tip so that the 2 grinds are the same on either end. And that's a little tougher to do if you're forging, because if you're going to forge that, and I've done it, and the forged ones do look great. I mean, they look more high dollar than the grinding them like this. But when you're doing a gate for somebody that's got 40 of these collars in there, you want them to be 40 that are the same. So unless there's any questions or comments, we can move forward. So once I've got the collar material cut to the length that I want it, it's find the middle, and then, which is that line there, and then and that will be on the front face, obviously on the front face of the collar. So I want an equal leg on either side of it to bend back. So we go half the distance. We're doing 1 1/8 inch collar here. So go up 9/16 from there, and I'll get a line. And so that tells me, then I can measure from that line to the tip of the collar material and set it in the vise. So I'm going at, so I can, as I do these in multiples, I can set it at 1 9/16 there to the end of the collar. And then the first bend I do in a machinist vise. It has a nice square corner, and then it a flat bottom in it where I can, because the bottom part is hugely critical in here. So the first bend, you just put it in at the 1 9/16 and hammer it over cold with a hammer. Then the second bend, there's a block below, and that you want to make sure that the first bend is tight down against that bottom, because if you bend it farther than 90 degrees and set it in this next setup, there's going to be a gap at the corner, and these have to be really, really tight. And the block that's sitting on top is the width of the material that I'm wrapping with this collar. And in this case, I think we're talking 1 1/8 here. And you'll see I've got a slight radius on the corners there that helps make a nice bend. And that kind of mimics the bevel on the scrolls that it's going to go around. And so I have a whole set of these blocks. They're 41/40 that are cut to various thicknesses. And so if I want a 3/4, I grab the 3/4 one. Want a 1 1/4, grab the 1 1/4 one, whatever it is, set it in there. And then the block underneath, I have a bunch of those that keep the height of the top of the upper block within close to the top of the vise, if that makes sense. I don't want to have that, I want to get a good grip with the vise on the collar material. And so I might need a shorter block. If the block on top is taller, I need a shorter block underneath there, so that basically the top edge of the vise is very close, right below the bottom edge of the upper block. And so I'll go through, when I have multiples of them, go through and do the first bend on all of them, and then do the second bend on all of them. And there's one that's got the second bend, and it's nice and tight on the block. You don't want to have any, you need to hammer like right at the corner. You're not going to hammer out on the end of the collar. You're keeping your hammer right at the corner to roll it over there nice and tight. And so there's the second bend. And then once all the collars are made, then all the parts are made and it's ready to put it together. And here Mark Cochin is in there helping me to get it put together.
He's headless.
Pardon me?
You can't see his head.
Oh,
It's hard to tell. It's hard to tell, but he's over here.
oh yeah, he's there in a purple shirt. So we're going to, the first thing will be to put the frame together. Let's see. So we're going to lay out all the pieces first. The collars, I think we talked about this last week, where the scrolls come together and where they come onto the other elements of the grill or the bracket. I don't want to rely on just the collars to hold this together because this is out in a public outdoors situation. I don't want to rely on the collars to be structural, if you will. So if I were doing this for a client, I would TIG weld the scrolls onto the bars and the scrolls together with a small TIG weld on both sides that will be covered by the collar, so it won't be seen, but that will structurally hold it together. Since we're not going to do that for this in this situation, I decided to drill holes through all those connections and put a little 1/8" pin in there to hold the give it more of a structural value at that connection. You can do rivets if you countersink the holes on both sides. You could actually rivet them. You need to get them down flat to the parent material so that the scroll or the collar will go on. But with the pins in there, once the collars go on, the pins aren't going to go anywhere. They can't move. So it's going to have to be something really traumatic to that the pins don't hold, or that the pins should have been rivets. So, so the first thing we're going to do is line all the scrolls up in position where they go, mark everything, drill holes in the 3/4 inch square bars, the horizontal bars, and then we can do that under the drill press, but then bring them back to the scrolls and they have to be transfer drilled through the 3/4 inch into the scrolls so that the holes line up. I'm not going to just go by a mark on the bar and drill a hole in there and think it's going to be fit to the other one. So I drill the holes in there. And then the mortise and tenons will be the first thing to happen. Getting the frame actually built. And you can tie those together with baling wire, which I remember doing, but I don't see it in any of the pictures that the baling wire was there. But I'm pretty sure we assembled the 2 vertical pieces and the 2 horizontal pieces with baling wire to hold it in together, and then set the tenons. And at each tenon, once you set one tenon, you want to check to see if it's square and try to get it as square as you can before you go to the next one. So let's move ahead here. So the first thing to do will be to assemble the verticals and the horizontals and to make the frame. And so here's the setup with the tenon through the hole, and you'll notice on the left the little chisel marks in there to kind of lock the tenon in, because if your hole is perfectly round and your tenon is perfectly round and you head it, it may be able to rotate or spin inside that hole. And so with just those little nicks in there, that head is going to set down in there and lock that in. So here's the first one getting ready to tenon, and you'll notice the little spacer bar in there. I've got the soft jaws in the vise, and I have a whole set of these spacer bars so that the jaws of the vise are parallel, and that's going to give a better grip on the 1/4 inch bar that I can't put down in the middle of the vise because it passes by the screw. And so it's going to make the vise the jaws want to rack in one direction. And so these spacers keep the jaws parallel, and you get a better bite with the vise. And here's setting down a rivet. First get it set down, and then these are not the rivet, the tenon, and then I do a 4-clout head on it. You can see under the hammer handle the hole that was drilled for the scrolls, and it's local heat just with the torch, and you want to heat it so that the heat runs down into the tenon. You don't want to just get the tip of it nice and hot. I'll get it nice and hot and then just back off for a little bit, let that heat soak down in the tenon so that whatever space is inside there, you'll have hot material to spread out into it instead of just putting a head on it. And here we are doing another one, which is probably the last one because I don't know why there's no baling wire on it. Maybe it's the last one. And then as long as you've checked with a framing square, that they're in there pretty square, the thing to do before going any farther is to measure diagonally from corner to corner on the outside of the frame to see if they're the same length, because we already checked that the horizontal bars are the same length and the vertical bars are the same length, but that doesn't necessarily mean the whole frame is square. So if you measure diagonally, hopefully it's the same measurement. If one diagonal is longer than the other, you can take the frame and in the long direction with one end on the floor and one end pointing toward the ceiling, raise it up and give it a thud on the floor and rack it into being square. But I don't think we had to do that with this one. I think it came out pretty close. So then it's a matter of putting scrolls on. And start with the bottom one. And then once the scrolls are in place and the pins are in, it's put the collars on and heat them up and hammer them over. So here it looks like the holes have been transfer drilled through that bottom bar into the scrolls and lining up the pins, and even transfer drilling them it can be a little bit of a fight to get the pins in. So the first one goes in easy, and the second one we may have to pull over with a clamp, and we'll see that, I think, in the next picture. So I want to get, before I put a collar on, I want to get all the pins into that particular piece so that there's no problem later. And then you can just slip 2 of the collars over these 2 connections to keep the pins from falling out. And the pins need to be no longer than what they're going through. And if they're a little short, it's fine. And you'll notice in that that picture, you see the chalk line is where that actually lined up. And just to the right of that chalk line is the center punch line that was the reference point for this. So it looks like I was off about maybe a 1/4 inch. Oh well, collar will cover that up.
So this center punch here?
Yeah, that was the center punch reference on that scroll from where the measurements were taken.
Oh,
But when it got done,
it was over here.
it should have been right there. So the best laid plans of mice and men. So then put collars on it just to keep the pins from falling out, because now we got to flip the thing over and get it into a spot where we can set the collar. And so here on this end, I'm using as an anvil the steel sawhorses that I have, and I keep it right over where the legs are, because you need a really solid anvil to set these collars. And we'll talk about it in one of the next couple of pictures. So anyway, the first thing to do is to make sure that collar is down all the way. And since there's a scroll shape, you can see the scroll is touching that 3/4 bar there right in the center, but you get out to where the edge of the scroll is, and it's actually a little wider there. And so you need to make sure that the collar is tight on the bottom. And I make sure I drive it down nice and tight till it's solid. And sometimes what will happen if the collar is too tight, it spreads the 2 legs apart a little bit. But you need to get it all the way down tight. And then you can put some heat on the bottom bend and knock the collar up against the side of what you're trying to collar. So here in the picture on the right, you only need local heat on right where you're going to bend it, and you obviously have to make the one with the right bevel bend down first. And so it's put heat there and hammer it down. And there's the first bend done, and then it's the same thing on the other side. And you can see this one's a little crooked and cattywampus there. You can take it, I use it like a little set hammer and straighten it out. And so that the bottom 2 are done. Now the top 2 are pretty much the same. This is a little more complicated. I want to get all the pins in here before I start collaring anything, just in case something's too tight or doesn't want to go. I don't want to have to try to redo the collars. So we've got all the 6 pins on the 6 collars and pins on the 3/4 square bar in place. And we'll do those and then go back and do the scrolls collar together. There's no pin in the scrolls touching. It would be easy enough to put a hole through one of them from the outside, but trying to drill the hole through to the second scroll would be pretty much impossible. So we're not worrying about the pins in there. So here I've got this green pipe that's under here that's acting as the anvil, is taller than the sawhorses. So that on the other end of the frame, it's sitting on the sawhorses, but on this end, all the weight is on that green pipe there, which is the anvil. And I'm checking to make sure that it's down nice and tight before you start hammering the collars over. And here okay, we're putting the pins in on the second one. And setting those collars.
I liked your acrobatics here. You like look at it from every angle.
Well, if your collar's not tight, the scroll's going to rattle. I mean, the scroll's not going to be tight. It's going to be floating around in there, and it's not what you want. So that set tool that I used earlier to straighten out that collar, I'll set that right down to get them set down. I'd use that set tool right down on top of the collar before it's folded over, and drive it down till I know that it's nice and tight down there, and then it's worth taking a look. So I think that picture's got all the collars in it, and looks like we're done.
Ta-da!
And then I took it up last year to the hammer in at Weaverville, and we bolted it onto the posts, and they were going to paint it and install it, and so there it is.
Awesome.
And there it is in place.
Right. Well, how many people are thinking about going to Weaverville this season?
Me.
I know I am. So there's
Considering.
3. All right.
Trying to.
I'm thinking about it.
That's a long ways for you Southern folks.
Yeah.
Really?
So, I mean, it's a long way for me. So.
How often does it snow
you're
at
welcome.
Weaverville?
Yes, I've been up there. I remember when I was education, and Josh and I mean, we were in our sorrels. I mean, there's snow on the ground, and nobody cared. We had a good time.
I've been up there where we took my travel trailer up there, got there, I think Wednesday night. Thursday morning, woke up to like 4 inches of snow on the ground. And then
Sure.
I've been there when it's 85 degrees.
Yeah, right. It can get pretty hot. So, but I don't know. When you drive into Weaverville from Reading up 299, you get kind of to the city limits, and then you can just see these big, gorgeous snow-covered mountains surrounding this little Weaverville. It's just kind of cool. So
Yeah, it is a beautiful drive getting in there, and
right.
And from anywhere in the town, it's just beautiful views around there. It's
Right. And the people are awesome.
And they're I think 2,400, 2,500 elevation. You have to go over the pass to get there, which is 3,200 or 3,400 feet.
Yeah. Is that Buck something? Buck Mountain or Buck?
March 16th, it's coming up.
Yeah. So anyway, I've always had a good time up there. So, and you can see John's handiwork. Gosh, I built a bunch of tools that are in the shop. It's just something you kind of get in your heart, and you just can't stop but make stuff for this place. So pretty cool. So anyway, that was very nice of you to do that, John, for Weaverville, and then to actually turn this into an educational, Zoom. Outstanding. So thank you, John and Victoria and David and Greg.
It was very clear. It made a lot of sense
And
how it all
Michael.
came together.
Right. It definitely takes a village to put some of this stuff together. So thank you, Zoom team. And well, we have to thank Michael, because he's it wouldn't happen without Michael. So cheers here. A cheers to Michael.
Cheers.
So
A lot of fun putting these all together.
yes.
Does anybody have any questions for John? Anything, details about how this came up during the technique or how it came together?
I was just going to mention that it was absolutely fantastic to go there and shoot the video. Your shop is extremely clean compared to other shops I've been in. I was like, did someone just come through here and clean? Because it was just very, very much a pleasure.
Well, and I just want to add that, how John has all those little templates and the blocks of certain sizes and the little post vise.
All the fixtures and jigs,
All the
of that is just,
Yeah,
Yeah.
he has them all organized in little boxes by size. It was like a dream up there.
Or a disease, I'm not sure.
I thought those were the same thing.
Well, I've started my own little boxes. They're not as robust
Yeah,
as John's, but I'm working on it.
I'm not as anal compulsive or whatever that is as you think I am, but
Well,
But it's nice to
what
be
I
able
love-
to find something when I want it.
Yeah. What I've always enjoyed is just how clean your projects can, turn out. I mean, I've worked with you on multiple projects, and you have this amazing eye. And I've learned a lot from you, John. So thank
I
you.
know. I like when you say, yeah, it looks like a drunken somebody went down there. I'm like, looks pretty straight to me.
Drunken sailor.
I don't see what you see.
Yeah, but if you look at it from the sight down the line, it's like, oh my gosh, I can't use this piece. And then, once you've cut it up into smaller pieces, or you're looking at it face on to the line, you can't see that it's that bad.
Right. Well, having John on the job that had 850 some odd pass-throughs, I think made John cross-eyed somewhat, but
Don't
I think
remind
you
me
had to pretty
about
much go into funny farm after that. So, but
that. So, and I will be demonstrating a picture frame up at Weaverville this time. Rod has asked me to do a picture frame